Episode 13 in the continuing story of the 2nd Battalion of the Essex Regiment in the Great War. Episode 13, build up to the Somme offensive, taking us up to the end of June 1916. In the previous episodes, we have seen the battalion's experience from when it went overseas in August 1914, through the battles of the retreat from Mons, through the battles of the Aisne, all the way through to the tail end of the Battle of Second Ypres, and that took us into mid-1915. In the latter part of 1915, the battalion was to actually experience quite a quiet time, though it did continue to move in and out of the line. And one of the reasons for this is it moved away from Ypres, where it had experienced such deadly and bloody days, and it moved further south and to the area known as the Somme, after the River Somme. Now, the reason for this move was partly as the British military expanded its footprint on the Western Front, but also because there was plans for a coming offensive in 1916 for the British and French military to cooperate together in a grand offensive. As the 1915 develops, in the tail end of 1915, the plans were actually to kind of go further and to try and coordinate an attack between all of the Allies, so the British and French on the Western Front and the Russians on the Eastern Front. But anyway, the 2nd Battalion Essex Regiment, part of the 12th Brigade of the 4th Division of the British Army, finds itself moving south onto the Somme area. And the picture we see on the screen here is from the official history of the British military operations on the Western Front, and it's a map related to the 1st of July 1916, this Somme offensive that I've already referred to. Now, one factor of moving down onto the Somme was that the British were to find themselves in quite close proximity to French soldiers, who were now allies as opposed to adversaries, as there had been many times throughout history, with perhaps the notable exception of the Crimea War. And the regimental history of the 2nd Essex notes that this led to some strange experiences. And the 2nd Battalion, the Essex Regiment in general, has an eagle as part of its emblems that it used. And this is after they captured an eagle off of the French army in Salamanca. And the regimental history notes that a French officer from the 62nd Regiment, whilst visiting the 2nd Essex as part of their liaison duties, spotted this eagle and found this to be quite exciting, because his unit was the unit that had lost their eagle during that battle at Salamanca, but they were unaware of which British regiment had captured it. Now, due to changes in the structure of the British Army, it was actually the 2nd 44th, which had actually become the 1st Battalion Essex Regiment, but needless to say, the Essex Regiment logos, badges, etc. were the same, and so the French officer cut a button off one of the British officers' uniforms and made off of it as a souvenir and as an explanation. Now, the area that the 2nd Essex were to find themselves working in is this area that we can see on the screen now. Mallet is the area that they mentioned often. And when they initially take over the line, they're actually taking over a series of posts rather than more the trench lines that we would expect. And these were towards the area of Herberton, which is up there towards the top of the screen. Again, as always, apologies about my pronunciation of French town names, etc. As I said, this was a bit of a quieter time. There was a lot of work being done to take over the trenches, to improve them, to connect them together as well, and so on. But the regimental war diary and indeed the regimental history both become a bit sparse during this period. And it jumps forward to September 1915, which was the time of an offensive near Luz, which the 2nd Essex weren't involved in. And it notes that the Imperial Majesty, Imperial Majesty, the Emperor of Russia, with the King's permission, has awarded various medals to members of the battalion. And one of the men that was awarded a Medal of St George second class was Sergeant W. Sharpley. Now, Sergeant Sharpley is someone we've met before in our story in earlier episodes. He had been singled out in various documents for leading patrols in an aggressive manner. He'd taken over running a platoon when his officer had been a casualty, and there's some reference to him getting a mention in dispatches for rescuing a wounded soldier in the sort of tail end of 1914, early 1915. You can tell that they're kind of out of the front line because of things like this happening, but also on the 21st of September, the troops had to prepare themselves, the troops meaning the 2nd Essex, as they were inspected by Kitchener of Khartoum, who by then was the war secretary. The British military is gearing itself up for this offensive that's going to take place in 1916, and potentially is learning lessons from offensives even going on at this point, as I've already mentioned, the Battle of Loos. And so there's some restructuring going on during this period. At the end of September 1915, the Vickers guns, the machine guns that were housed with the battalion, were actually kind of taken away and coalesced into a brigade machine gun company. And at that point, the battalion starts to receive Lewis guns in place of the Vickers guns, and we'll get some imagery of that into the presentation at a later point. Also, more troops are now coming across, and the 4th Division has been at the Western Front since August 1914. We're now starting to see Kitchener's army starting to arrive, those volunteers that your country needs you type of men. And what happens to the 2nd Essex as part of the 12th Brigade is they're actually loaned out to a couple of different divisions. Initially, the 36th Ulster Division and then the 37th Division. And this might well be a case of trying to stiffen up these new units as they come into the line to get experience, using experienced units to kind of give them that sort of underpinning knowledge. Now, in January 1916, there's a wave of awards given, and they're noted in the Battalion War Diary on the 17th of January, but are noted as being effective from the 1st of January, so New Year's awards, if you like. And I'm going to reel through them. There's only a couple of pictures on the screen to represent various people. But the gentleman on the left there, Arthur Maitland, he was a captain at the time and was awarded the Military Cross. The image I've got here is of him later in the war, in 1918, and quite interestingly, he doesn't appear to be wearing the ribbon for his Military Cross. Also awarded the Military Cross was Lieutenant Walter Percy Spooner. Awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal, which is quite a high gallantry medal for other ranks, was Sergeant Flack, who was in charge of the signal section, Private Fryer and Private Boyle, who were both stretcher bearers with C Company. Awarded a mention in dispatches was Lieutenant Colonel Sir George Sterling, who's the gentleman in the middle there. Captain Maitland, again I go on the left, was also awarded a mention in dispatches. Captain Irwin, that's Noel Irwin, that we've met many a time, was awarded a mention in dispatches, and so was Lieutenant Spooner, who we've just heard was awarded a Military Cross as well. Also awarded medals was Sergeant Cousins. Now, the very bad image on the right there comes from a local newspaper to the Southend-on-Sea area, and this says it's Sergeant J. Cousins. Now, Sergeant J. Cousins, who had been killed by this time, was in part of the machine gun section, which we know Maitland was involved in as well due to earlier episodes. And also a Sergeant Cousins W, which I believe is his brother, was also awarded a Distinguished Conduct Medal, So we believe this is John Cousins in this picture who was killed, and he was killed in the Second Ypres fighting, so this is an award for quite some time before. As well as the Cousins brothers, if you pardon that one, there was Lance Corporal Gooch, Lance Corporal Moss, and Lance Corporal Thompson were all awarded Distinguished Conduct Medal. And also in January, Company Sergeant Major Chapman, so the sort of senior kind of non-commissioned officer in a company, for example, was commissioned. And we often think of the officers being of a different class, etc., from the other ranks, but this is one of many examples of men that have come through the ranks and been commissioned. As already mentioned, at this point in time, Lieutenant Strait and 36 other ranks have struck off the strength of the battalion as they move across to the Brigade Machine Gun Group. And something that was quite interesting to note in the Battalion War Diary is that they have an inspection on the 30th of January, and it is noted that the men's boots are in very bad condition, not due to their faults, but because they're awaiting a resupply and sort of an update through their logistics. Now, much of the time, this early time of 1916, the battalion is in and around this area. Now, just off the screen to the right, behind the red lines, which represent the German trenches, is a town called Serre, S-E-R-R-E. And the area of interest to us is these four copses, John, Luke, Mark and Matthew, reading from top of the map to bottom of the map, reading from north to south as this map is orientated. Now, these are to become quite famous on the 1st of July 1916, and I got these maps off the Western Front Association trench mapping software, and that allows you to sort of merge them a little bit with the modern day mapping. So I don't know if this makes it a little bit easier to see kind of where we are on the map there, but the copses are of interest. And one of the things that happens during this period is Sergeant Sharpley is again kind of thrust into the frame for his actions on the 6th of February 1916. And I'll read you the citation, which is written out in the battalion war diary. It's actually dated the 22nd, which is obviously after the events. But honours and rewards. The Commander-in-Chief has awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal to number 9214 Sergeant W. Sharpley, 2nd Battalion, Essex Regiment, for the following act of gallantry. About 6 a.m, the 6th of February 1916, Lance Corporal Rogers, 2nd Battalion, Essex Regiment, was severely wounded at an isolated post in front of our trenches southeast of Herberton. And remember, Herberton's just off the top of this map on the screen. So back to the citation. It was impossible to reach him except over the open, and Sergeant Sharpley, accompanied by Lance Corporal Fawcett, 2nd Battalion, Essex Regiment, went out at 7:30 a.m. under hostile fire and succeeded in getting in Lance Corporal Rogers back to our trenches. Owing to the exposed nature of ground and the deep mud, it was not until 1:15 p.m. that this was safely accomplished. And here is a little picture of part of his citation. That's in the list of Distinguished Conduct Medals awarded to the 2nd Essex, or to the Essex Regiment. Seems to be some disparity. That Sharpley's is mentioned here, but other men that I've just listed a few minutes ago, I can't find their citations. And one of the interesting things about Sharpley, which I think we've mentioned in previous episodes, is that he was a pre-war regular with the battalion, but prior to that, he'd been a professional footballer. And he had played for a Leicester team, which kind of now is tracked back in history to Leicester City Football Club. And we can see that they have information on their website as well, which basically repeats much of the information that I've got for you. I've still not been able to find a photo of Sergeant Sharpley, so if anyone has one, I'd be really interested to see/receive one. But here he is again, that concept of that in most military units of 30 men perhaps, there's 2 or 3 that are kind of really up for the fight and will be aggressive and take action. There's about a third that will follow those people when instructed to. There's another third or so that if they're pushed will do what they've got to do, and potentially there's another third that would actively try and avoid participation. And I think Sergeant Sharpley is definitely part of that kind of Group A as it's described in one study. Now, during this time in the line, which is still around that area of Matthew, Luke, Mark and John Copps, there was another casualty I'm just going to take a moment to talk about. We've often in our stuff talked about the officers because they're quite easy to research, but there was a casualty on the 17th of February 1916 with Sergeant Herbert Guiver. Now, Herbert Guiver was born on the 30th of May 30th of May 1882, and he was born in the Ilford area. Now, he joined the Essex Regiment and served with the 1st Battalion during the Boer War and saw active service out there, but he left the army in 1905, and in 1906 he joined the Essex Constabulary, the Essex Police if you like, and he was based in the Shoeburyness area. And in one of those like lovely little kind of echoes through time, my grandfather was also in the police there and was based at Shoeburyness Police Station as well, so I kind of like that little connection. Herbert Guiver was married in June 1908, and when Southend Borough Police was formed out of Essex Police on the wonderful date of the 1st of April 1914, Herbert Guiver was one of those that transferred across to Southend Police because he was in Shoeburyness. Looking at the dates, you can see that April 14, well, we know what's coming, and at the outbreak of war, Herbert returned to the battalion. Many of the sources say that he was recalled as a reservist, which he would have been, but police officers at some times have been a reserved occupation, so I need to look into that a bit more. But he goes away with the battalion at the beginning of the war. Now, on the date in question, the 17th of February, this is what the war diary has to say. From 11 a.m. to 12:30 a.m, the enemy opened a heavy bombardment on our trenches between John Copps and Mark Copps. Our artillery retaliated and eventually silenced hostile trench mortars and field guns. About 10 p.m, one of the enemy surrendered. He belonged to the 66th Regiment 52nd Division and stated that he was the only Pole in his regiment. Prisoner, when questioned, gave some very useful information with regards to the disposition of the enemy, etc. Casualties, 3 killed, 2 wounded. And Herbert Guiver was one of those that was killed. And the story that comes back to the family is that he was killed instantly by shell fire. Now, there was a number of reports because as a police officer. He was kind of like a person known. And in the local newspapers, there was information shared by his widow, and it says that she received a letter from Captain Irwin, which is once again, as always, our Noel Irwin that we've encountered many times. And this is apparently what Noel Irwin wrote. I greatly regret to have to tell you that the news you have received of your husband is true. Your husband was killed by a shell. I was standing near to him at the time, and I'm glad to be able to tell you that death was instantaneous and that he could have suffered no pain. It is not within my power to offer you due consolation, but it will be more comforting to you to know that his death I lose one of my keenest non-commissioned officers, and he has left a place that I cannot easily refill. He is mourned by myself and my whole company. And Herbert Guiver is now buried in Sucre Military Cemetery, which is nearby to the area that we're talking about. Other things happening at the time. On the 5th of June, Captain Bruce Swinton Smith Masters, according to the War Diary, is awarded a military cross. Now, further research suggests that he might have received it in December, and why it's listed on the War Diary on the 5th of June I've not been able to get hold of. So Swinton seemed quite an unusual middle name. There is a Swinton, which is a town, but it would appear that it's through his mother's family connections that this name was put in, and he was connected to a Sir Alan Swinton, who was a Scottish knight, who is part of, well, he's actually the main protagonist of the author Walter Scott's account of the Battle of Hallenden Hill. Now, writing seems to come through the family because Bruce Smith Masters' mother was also an author and wrote sort of stirring stories about scouts that had stepped up and been brave before the war, and then once the war had broken out, she continued to write and told stories about kind of what had happened to these scouts as they had then joined up to serve their country in a sort of patriotic way. Now, whilst this is all happening, the battalion is getting ready for this coming offensive. Throughout May, the training starts to begin, and I think perhaps in many ways, if you think of, we knew the offensive was starting from last year, the fact that the battalion only gets time to do training in May suggests that kind of things weren't as good as they could have been. They initially started with individual training, which was musketry and bayonet fighting. They then move on to sort of section and platoon skills, such as fire control. There was also work being done on things including like smoke hoods, in case there was the use of gas. And then specialist skills, so like signallers were going off and practicing their sort of flag signalling, hopefully, I guess, with the idea that they'd be in the enemy trenches and sending back signals to say how far they'd advanced. However, whilst this training is ongoing, and some of it sounds quite detailed, there was like models made of the trenches that they would be attacking, the battalion is still stung very, very frequently for what's called working parties. So soldiers would be sent off to kind of dig trenches, to move equipment around and so on. And the War Diary kind of lists these numbers of men that are going off, and it is quite frequent to see numbers of up to 640 men being sent off on working parties kind of each day to dig trenches and so on. And just as an example, in the latter part of June, the following's kind of list, that D Company and parts of A Company have been detached to make artillery emplacements. B Company and parts of C Company have been detached to lay cable underground. And on the same day that this is listed, it says that no, other men have made a clay miniature nearby of the trenches, so that kind of people can go off and study it and look at the ground over which they'll be attacking. Now the attack is coming, and on June the 26th, the bombardment starts, the artillery bombardment starts. Now, there was some movement on the planned start day, but as many people know from British military history, the attack is going to occur on the 1st of July 1916, and as the regimental history itself says, this was a trying day. It's probably one of the worst days, it's often quoted as one of the worst days for the British Army from a casualty point of view, and my research would suggest it probably is the worst day for the 2nd Battalion Essex Regiment from a casualty point of view. So that is going to be the next episode, and I actually anticipate breaking it down into a couple of episodes because the story is quite complex. So hopefully you're enjoying these videos. If you are, please do drop a like and subscribe, because that will give me some encouragement. If you have questions, or if somebody has got a photo of Sergeant William Sharpley somewhere, feel free to kind of let me know. I'm travelling soon, so there may be a delay before the next video, but the next ones that will come out will be covering that trying day the 1st of July 1916.